Welcome back to Area DMG. I'm your host, Phil Wesley, the Mile High Mouth, and today we're going to talk about the Sega Handheld family. The Sega Handheld family, or rather, well, Sega's whole life in the handheld business is kind of weird. They currently make a lot of games for the Sony PlayStation Vita and for the Nintendo 3DS. But back a long time ago, when Nintendo had the original Game Boy, Sega thought they might try a hand in the portable market. Everyone was. There was the Atari Lynx, and there was the Sega Game Gear. But before we get into that, let's talk really quickly about some of the weird oddities of Sega in handhelds. Sega licensed out a lot of their games, including some of their popular Genesis titles, for things like the Tiger game systems. These terrible things that if you were you thought you were cool if you had one of these, but you really weren't. These are kind of terrible. Yeah, come on. Yeah, these types of things, they're just bad and annoying and terrible, and we're not going to talk too much about those. We will do something at some point about Tiger handhelds. But, yeah, Sega licensed a bunch of their stuff to Tiger Handhelds, but thankfully they had their own little item that they put out called the Game Gear. The Game Gear was released in Japan in 1990. It actually cost much more than the Game Boy at the time, but it had a color screen. The Game Gear was released in 1990 in Japan, 1991 in the US. It sold 10.4 million units worldwide, and it uses a Zilog Z80. That's an 8-bit processor. Its processor speed is, well, we're going to have all that information in a bit, but it had about a couple hundred games. They're in color, although it's a little tough to see right now. Yeah, that screen. See, there we go. Let's try and yeah, as you can see, it's color. It had a maximum sprite size of 8.8 by 8. There was about 32 colors on screen out of 4,096 colors that it could choose from, and it was cartridge based. Cartridges look like this. Majesco re-released the Game Gear later on in black. Of course, it came out in black, and of course, it takes 6 AA batteries that last maybe 3 to 4 hours. This is the Game Gear. Now, there was a converter for it because it's essentially just a handheld Master System. There's a converter for it so you can play Master System games on it, and there was a TV converter. A TV tuner, which nowadays is kind of useless in the United States. You can't actually pick up any channels, which is kind of sad. But yeah, this is the Game Gear. It was a competitor to the Game Boy, but it's being more expensive and being kind of difficult to see, even though it was color. I remember I was given a choice between a Game Gear and a Game Boy, and my thing was like, you know what, I'm going to go with the Game Boy, because with the Game Boy I get better battery life, and it had more games that I wanted. There's only like a half dozen RPGs that came out for this system in the United States, and it was much more expensive than the Game Boy. It may have had color, but that didn't actually help it. Now the Game Gear, it got discontinued about 1994, 1995, and then Majesco bought the rights to the Game Gear design and re-released it, where they started putting out the games for about $15 a pop, and the system for $30. Now, the system came bundled in with columns, and then there's a Sport Edition later on, which is blue. That's the version we have over here. Most of the time there's black, and there is also a red Coca-Cola one. The red one's actually worth a good bit of money. Other than that, Game Gears are essentially, well, garage sale fodder. You can get them really cheap. I kind of like it. A lot of the best games for it, though, are already available on Nintendo 3DS Virtual Console. So I don't really miss it too much. It was a decent little system. One interesting thing about the TV tuner is that it also has the ability to put an AV cable in it. So you can hook up an NES and use your Game Gear as a portable screen for it, which is just really weird if you ask me. The Game Gear was, well, it was a modest success. Like I said, it sold 10.4 million units worldwide, compared to about over 100 million units of the Game Boy. I mean, the Game Boy was a monster when it came to sales. Just ridiculous. Anyways, around 1995, Sega had been kind of tinkering with the idea of putting out another handheld. The Sega Game Gear did better in the United States and Europe than it did in Japan, and they thought, well, you know what? America's where we do pretty well. We've got the Genesis, and that's doing okay, but that's kind of winding down. We have the Saturn coming up. We have the 32X. We have the Sega CD. All this stuff we're working on. Hey, why don't we take the MegaJet system that we have in some planes and attach a screen to it? And thus the Nomad was born. The Sega Nomad, released only in the United States in 1995, is interesting in that it plays a lot of Genesis titles, just not, it doesn't work with the 32X or the Sega CD, and not all Genesis titles will work with it. I would say it's similar to, like, say, the Superboy, where there's like a handful of games that won't work on that. Like, there's a handful of games that won't work on the Sega Nomad. It's kind of an interesting system. This one takes, let's see, that battery pack thing in the back is so awkward. Okay, let's, oh, for crying out loud. Yeah, we're talking 8 AA batteries. 8 of them. Yeah, 8 AA batteries. Wait, sorry, 6 AA batteries. Yeah, I just can count today. Anyways, 6 AA batteries, kind of ridiculous. They give about 3 to 4 hours of life. Most of the time, you're just going to hook this puppy up to a power cord anyways. You can play 2-player games on it. It'll play Sega Genesis games for the most part. And you can also hook it up to your TV with the AV out that's attached to it. That sold about 1 million units. And then that's about all she wrote on that. The Sega Nomad died pretty quickly. They didn't really support it. They didn't put out a second version that could work with anything. I mean, at least the Game Gear, or rather the Sega Game Gear, not the Majesco ones, could work with the master converter and the TV tuner. The Nomad didn't really work with any of the other attachments, which is really a shame. Well, the Dreamcast, a little bit before the Dreamcast came out, Sega put out their last kind of pseudo handheld, which would be the Visual Memory Unit, or the VMU. The thing about the VMU is that this thing has the worst battery life I have ever seen. Even when it's asleep, it's on and draining the battery. What's interesting about it is that it was something that you plugged into the Dreamcast controller. Yeah. And it displayed a second screen. Where have we heard that before? Anyways, the second screen on some things, like for example on Resident Evil Code Veronica, your vitals are here on the screen and it would beep and make noise at you. With Sonic Adventure, you could attach a KO to it via the KO Garden, and then take that KO with you on the go and play with it. Level it up, pop it back in, and go. There was actually plans to release one of these that in the future, that because this only has 128 kilobytes of space, it's essentially a glorified memory card. There's actually plans to release a version of this with 64 megabits of space and a headphone port so that you could use it for playing MP3s. This is, it was an interesting little thing. To be perfectly honest, I rather did like the idea of having a visual representation of my health in Resident Evil Code Veronica, as well as other games. Kind of interesting. It's got a 48 by 32 black and white pixel screen, and it was essentially the last, quote, handheld that Sega ever put out. What's also interesting about it is that you could also exchange data with some of the games. I think there was a Street Fighter game where you could take two of the VMUs and load up your fighter, then connect them to each other and be like, oh hey, and fight people. Kind of an interesting idea. Kind of a weird, gimmicky dual screen deal going on there. And of course they came in all sorts of colors, and there's a ton of them. If you go to like some of the electronic stores in Japan, you'll see a ton of VMUs, like especially the old ones in like Akihabara. And yeah, that's pretty much that. The VMU was about, I remember getting one for as low as $14.99 near the end of the Dreamcast life. I think they debuted for like $20 to $30. Not too bad. Sony had their a version of this called the Pocket Station, which never actually made it out in the United States. But yeah, that's the Sega Handheld family. You have the Sega Game Gear, which is pretty much their big one. The Sega Nomad, which was US only for the most part, and region locked. And then the VMU, which was frustrating. You could play little Tamagotchi style games with it, but there wasn't really a purpose to it besides being a second screen, which is actually pretty useful. I kind of feel that second screen technology with like Sony's Remote Play or with Nintendo's Wii U hasn't really been explored as much as it should be, and that's really a shame. But yeah, this is the Sega Handheld family. After Sega got out of the console business, well, they've just started putting stuff out for the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo 3DS, Nintendo DS, and Sony products. Kind of sad, really, but that's the Sega Handheld family. The biggest and the brightest star of this is the Game Gear, which, like I said, a lot of those are available now on 3DS Virtual Console, and you should definitely check those out. But other than that, that's that. That would be Sega. Kind of an interesting legacy, if you will. But yeah. None of these are particularly valuable except for the Nomad. A Nomad will now fetch you up about $100+, which isn't too bad. You can actually get them for fairly cheap if you know where to look, and if you can fix it, you can buy broken ones for pretty cheap and just fix like the screen. The problem with a lot of these ones is that, well, let me show you the screen on the Nomad before we go. Okay. Yeah. This is the worst battery thing. There we go. There we go. Now here comes the fun part. Seriously, 6 AA batteries in each and every single one of these 6 AA batteries. Okay, there's that. I have a couple black ones that actually don't work anymore, the Game Gear, because you can find a lot of them available for parts. And then I like the blue one here, mainly because it's blue. Sometimes you'll find these in thrift stores or whatnot, where they'll have them up for like ridiculous prices, and then they'll be missing like their battery covers. But overall, Game Gear's an interesting thing. I think less people have nostalgia for the Game Gear than they do for other devices. Yeah, definitely a slightly better screen. Let's hit start. Yeah, check that out. Come on. Yay. Nah, I'll just do that anyways, just show it off. Yep. There we go. There's yeah. That's the Sega Nomad for you. Not too bad, although you can get a lot of Sega 3D classics on the Nintendo 3DS right now, including Streets of Rage and Streets of Rage 2. But yeah, that's the Sega Handheld family. And I'm your host, Phil Wesley, the Mile High Mouth. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And until the next video comes out, you are now caught up. Oh, stick around after the credits for like a bunch of spreadsheet information about all of these systems. So yeah, see you next time. Until then, you are now caught up.